morning I drove to my own house and rang the doorbell like a stranger, I knew something in me had already let go. I straightened my collar in the rearview mirror out of habit. 38 years of showing up to work every morning will do that to a man. Then I looked at that front door, the one I'd painted myself the summer before my son's wedding, and I thought, this is the last time. My name is Walter? No, wait. Let me start over. People always want to know the name first. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that I am 64 years old. I spent 40 of those years building something, and I spent the last 3 watching it get picked apart by people who smiled at me across my own dinner table. My son, I'll call him by his name, Adrian, married Celeste 7 years ago. I liked her at first. She was sharp, quick with a joke, and she made Adrian laugh in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager riding his bike down our street without looking where he was going. I thought, good, she'll keep him on his toes. What I didn't understand then was that on his toes would eventually mean too busy balancing to notice his father falling. My wife, Joanna, passed in 2019. Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I won't talk about that part too long because it still sits in my chest like a stone I can't cough up. What I would say is that after she was gone, the house, our house, the one we bought in 1991 for $112,000 in Greenville, South Carolina, felt like a museum. Every room preserved exactly as she'd left it. Her reading glasses still on the nightstand. Her handwriting on the grocery list still stuck to the fridge. Adrian called me 2 months after the funeral. He and Celeste were renting an apartment in Charlotte. Things were tight, he said. Celeste had just left her job at the marketing firm. Adrian's salary at the logistics company was covering them, but barely. Dad, he said, what if we moved in with you for a while, just until we get back on our feet? I said yes before he finished the sentence. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't entirely selfless. That house was too quiet. The idea of Adrian's voice down the hall, of coffee being made in the morning by someone other than me, I needed that. I needed the noise of living people, so I told them to come, and I told them not to worry about rent, and I meant it. They arrived in March. I'd cleared out the guest room, bought a new mattress, put fresh towels in the hallway bathroom. Celeste walked through the front door, looked around at the living room, at Joanna's curtains and the family photos on the mantel, and said, we'll need to update some of this eventually. I smiled. I told myself she was just talking about decor. The first year was manageable. Adrian worked long hours. Celeste was figuring out her next steps, which I came to understand meant spending a significant amount of time redecorating rooms that weren't hers and hosting dinner parties for her friends where I felt like a guest in my own home. I paid for the groceries. I paid the utilities. When the water heater went out in November, I paid for that too. When Celeste mentioned she'd always wanted a double oven, I found myself looking at appliances online that same night. I don't know when exactly the line moved. That's the thing about slow erosion. You don't notice the ground shifting until you're standing somewhere completely different from where you started. By the second year, Celeste had a system. She called it the household budget, which she presented to me on a Sunday afternoon with a printed spreadsheet like she was making a business proposal. I was listed as a line item, Dad's contribution. She'd filled in the number herself. I didn't say anything. Adrian was sitting next to her looking at the table. I paid what she'd written down. That month, and the month after, and the month after that. The thing I keep coming back to is this. At no point did either of them ask how I was doing. Not in any real way. Adrian would say, "How are you, Dad?" the way you say it, passing someone in a hallway. A sound, not a question. Celeste had stopped making eye contact with me somewhere around month 10. I became furniture. Useful furniture, the kind you don't think about until it breaks. My friend Hank. We've known each other since the early 90s. Used to coach Little League together. Noticed before I did. We had lunch in January of last year. a diner we'd been going to since forever, and he looked at me across the table and said, "You look tired in a way that's got nothing to do with sleep." I told him about the spreadsheet. I told him about the dinner parties. I told him about how Celeste had started referring to the house as our place when talking to her friends on the phone. Hank put down his coffee cup. "She's not renting from you," he said. "She's moving you out." I drove home thinking he was being dramatic. Then, 2 weeks later, the wine glass happened. It was a Thursday evening. I'd come home from a doctor's appointment, routine checkup, nothing serious, and I walked into the kitchen to find Celeste on the phone, speaking fast, irritated. She held up one finger at me like I was interrupting. I opened the refrigerator to get some water. She ended the call and turned around. I don't know what set her off. I never found out. Maybe it was the phone call. Maybe it was something Adrian had said. Maybe it was just me being there, taking up space in a room she'd decided was hers. "You know what your problem is," she said. "You just wander around this house like you have nothing to do, like you're waiting for someone to hand you a purpose." I turned around. I kept my voice level. "Celeste, this is my home. And we live here too." She picked up her wine glass from the counter. She always had a glass going by 6 o'clock, and I don't know if she meant to throw it or if it just happened. But the wine hit me across the face and neck before I could process that. Her arm had moved. I stood there dripping red wine onto my own kitchen floor. Adrian walked in 30 seconds later. He took one look at me, one look at her, and said, "What happened?" Celeste said, "He provoked me." Adrian looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded and put his hand on his wife's shoulder. I went upstairs. I washed my face. I changed my shirt. I sat on the edge of my bed. The same bed Joanna and I had slept in for 22 years. And I was very quiet for a very long time. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that, not because crying would have been wrong, but because what I felt wasn't sadness. It was more like clarity. The kind that comes when fog burns off and you finally see the road. The next morning I called Hank before 7. "I need a real estate attorney," I said, "and someone who handles estate documents." Hank didn't ask any questions. He just said, "I'll have 2 names to you by noon." What followed was quiet, purposeful. I want you to understand that I did not act out of anger, or not only out of anger. I acted because I finally understood that dignity is not something someone can give back to you once they've taken it. You have to go get it yourself. Step 1 was the personal property. Before any legal process began, before anyone was notified of anything, I systematically went through the house and removed what mattered. Joanna's jewelry, which I'd always planned to leave to her sister's daughters, the photo albums, all 14 of them, from our wedding through Adrian's childhood and everything after. My father's Navy medals, framed and mounted in the study, the chest of tools in the garage that had been my grandfather's, the small oil painting Joanna had bought at a craft fair in Vermont in 2003 because she said the light in it looked like forgiveness. I moved all of it to a climate-controlled storage unit in a part of town. Adrian and Celeste never visited. I did it over the course of 3 Saturdays while they were out. I told them I was running errands. Step 2 was the attorney. Her name was Margaret Osei, a woman about my age, completely unimpressed with everyone, which I found deeply reassuring. She'd been handling estate and property law in the Greenville area for over 25 years. I sat across from her desk on a Tuesday afternoon and I laid out the situation plainly. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she clasped her hands and said, "You own the house outright, no mortgage." "Paid it off in 2011, I said. She nodded. "Then let's talk about your options." The house had been appraised 3 years prior at around $420,000. Given what the market had done since then, Margaret estimated it would likely sell in the mid to high 400s. She referred me to a colleague, a real estate agent named Dennis Fowler, who'd worked the upstate South Carolina market for decades. And within 10 days of our first meeting, I had a listing agreement signed. Dennis was discreet. He scheduled showings on weekday mornings, when Adrian was at work and Celeste was typically still asleep or out at her yoga class. We accepted an offer within 3 weeks. A young couple relocating from Atlanta. They loved the kitchen and the yard. They asked if the double oven was included. I said yes. The closing was set for a date 6 weeks out. I had everything I needed. What remained was the hardest part. Not legally, not financially, but personally. I updated my will. That took a single afternoon in Margaret's office. I had named Adrian as the primary beneficiary years ago, back when the idea of having to think carefully about such things felt distant and theoretical. I removed him, not out of spite, or not entirely. Out of accuracy, the man who would have deserved that inheritance was the boy who used to fall asleep in the back seat of my car on long drives, who called me when his first job fell through, who stood next to me at his mother's grave and didn't let go of my hand for a long time. That man and the one living in my house and looking away while his wife threw wine in my face. I could not find the thread connecting them anymore. I left a portion to Joanna's sister. I established a small scholarship in Joanna's name through our old church. The rest I restructured into accounts that would take care of me and, eventually, be distributed to causes she and I had talked about over the years. A literacy nonprofit, a local animal rescue, a summer program for kids in our old neighborhood. I slept better that night than I had in 2 years. The notification came on a Wednesday. I chose a Wednesday because it was the middle of the week. Ordinary, no occasion to hang the memory on. I drove to the house, let myself in with my key, still my key, technically, for a few more weeks, and sat down at the kitchen table. Celeste came downstairs around 10. She was in her robe, holding her phone. She stopped when she saw me sitting there in my coat. "You're up early," she said, and moved to the coffee maker. "Sit down," I said. Something in my voice made her turn around. I waited until she was seated. Then I placed a folder on the table between us. Inside was a copy of the signed purchase agreement, the closing date, and a letter I had written myself. 3 paragraphs. Plain language, explaining that I had sold the house, that closing would occur in 37 days, and that I would need them to have vacated the premises by the Friday before that date. Celeste stared at the folder. She didn't open it. Her face went through several different expressions in the space of about 10 seconds. Confusion, then disbelief, then a kind of rigid blankness that I recognized as the thing that came just before anger. "You can't do this," she said. "I've already done it," I said. "The agreement is signed." "Adrian." "You're welcome to call him," I said. "This will affect him too. I've left a copy in his study." She pushed back from the table. Her voice went up. She said things, some of them unkind, some of them about Joanna, some of them about me, about what kind of father I was, what kind of man. I listened. I kept my hands flat on the table. I did not raise my voice once. When she finally went quiet, I stood up. "I've arranged 37 days, I said. That's more notice than you gave me about anything." I picked up my folder. I walked to the door. I looked back once at the kitchen, at the double oven, at the curtains Celeste had replaced with one she preferred, at the table where Joanna and I used to have our morning coffee in silence, the way people do when they've known each other long enough that quiet is its own conversation. Then I walked out. Adrian called 4 times that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. That evening I listened to the messages. The first 2 were angry. The third one cracked in the middle and I had to stop and sit for a minute because underneath the anger was still my son's voice. The one I've known since he was 3 days old and too small for the world. The 4th message was quiet. He said, "Dad, I should have said something that night. I know that. I saved that one. I haven't decided what to do with it yet. That's a different story, maybe for a different day. For now, the story is this. I am living in a 2-bedroom apartment 3 miles from a park where Joanna and I used to walk on Sunday mornings. I have my grandfather's tools in the corner of the 2nd bedroom. The oil painting hangs in the hallway where I can see it from the kitchen. I have a neighbor named Gloria. She's 71, retired high school principal, makes exceptional chili, and we have coffee on her back porch on Saturday mornings and argue about books and baseball and whether the gas station on 5th Street makes better biscuits than the one on Rutherford. 3 weeks ago, she brought me a slice of lemon cake because I mentioned once, in passing, that it was Joanna's birthday. I didn't ask her to remember, she just did. There's something about being seen by someone who has no obligation to see you. It rearranges something. I don't know what Gloria and I are to each other yet. Neither does she. We're not in a hurry. We're both old enough to know that patience isn't the same as waiting. It's a decision you make every day about what deserves your time. What I know is this. I wake up now without a weight on my chest. I make coffee at whatever hour I please. I eat what I want for dinner. I read until midnight if the book is good. My house, my actual house, the one I carry inside me now, the one made of habit and memory and deliberate choice, goes with me wherever I am. Some things cannot be taken from you, and some things you have to be brave enough to put down before they can be taken. I put mine down on a Wednesday morning at a kitchen table with a folder and 37 days and not a single word raised above a conversational tone. For the first time in longer than I can account for, I feel like myself again. I've thought a lot about that Thursday evening in the kitchen. The wine, the silence, Adrian's hand on Celeste's shoulder. People ask me sometimes, Hank, Gloria, a few others, whether I regret how long I waited, whether I wish I'd walked out sooner. Honestly, I'm not sure sooner would have taught me what staying did. There's something that happens when you absorb enough, when you pay the bills and swallow the comments and watch your own home become a place you tiptoe through. And then one day you simply stop. Not because you snapped, not because you finally hit a wall and lost control, but because something in you gets very quiet and very clear all at once, and you understand that what's being taken from you isn't just comfort or money or space. It's the story you're telling yourself about who you are. I let that story get rewritten for 3 years. That's on me. What I had to reckon with, and this is the part nobody talks about in these situations, is that I enabled it. I said yes to things I should have questioned. I wrote checks I shouldn't have written. I told myself it was generosity when some of it was just avoidance. It's easier to pay for the double oven than to have the conversation about what's really happening in your own house. I know that now. Knowing the difference between kindness and conflict avoidance dressed up as kindness. That's something I had to learn the hard way. The intelligence part, the clear-eyed, unsentimental ability to see a situation for exactly what it is, that took me longer than it should have. I kept filtering what I saw through what I wanted it to be. I wanted Adrian to be the son I remembered. I wanted Celeste to come around. I wanted the family version of things that was slowly dissolving right in front of me. Letting go of that, not bitterly but clearly, that's its own kind of work. It requires a willingness to stop explaining away what your own eyes are telling you. And then there's the part about standing up and doing something about it. That's the part people underestimate. It wasn't one dramatic moment. It was 37 days of small, deliberate actions. Renting the storage unit, meeting with Margaret, reviewing the will line by line, driving to Dennis's office. Each one of those things required me to decide, again, that I was worth the effort. But my name on a deed meant something, that the rest of my life was not a postscript. What actions produce they tend to produce consistently, Celeste treated the house like hers because I let her. Adrian stayed quiet because there were no consequences for staying quiet. And when I changed the conditions, quietly, legally, without drama, everything else followed. That's not a mystery. That's just how things tend to go when you finally align what you do with what you actually believe about yourself. Gloria brought me lemon cake because she remembered something I said in passing 3 weeks earlier. That's such a small thing. But I'll tell you, after 3 years of being furniture, being remembered felt like something I had to relearn how to receive. I'm still learning. That's the truth of it. Some mornings I sit with my coffee and the oil painting on the wall, and I think about Adrian's 4th voicemail, the one where his voice cracked. I don't know yet what that becomes, but I'm not carrying it the way I used to carry things, like a debt I owed someone else. I carry it like mine, because it is.